When people say something is hard, most of the time what they really mean is that it is unfamiliar. They're not describing the actual nature of the task, they're describing their emotional response to it. That's a critical distinction. We tend to equate difficulty with impossibility, when in reality what we are facing is simply the gutter shock of encountering something we haven't yet learned to navigate. The brain resists novelty at first. It doesn't like uncertainty, and so it interprets that uncertainty as danger. That's why something new feels but intimidation isn't the same thing as impossibility. It's simply the price of entry into growth. Think about any skill you've mastered today, no matter how basic. Walking, reading, writing, even speaking. There was a time when each of these felt impossible. Imagine a child learning to walk. He falls over, he stumbles, he cries. If you didn't know better, you might assume walking is an almost unachievable task. Yet, within a year or two, it becomes second nature. Why? Because the child doesn't see stumbling as proof that the task is too hard. He sees it as part of the process. His brain doesn't translate the failure into despair, it translates it into learning. Somewhere along the way, as adults, we lose that mindset. We begin to misinterpret the natural awkwardness of starting something new as evidence that we are incapable. But the truth is, you've proven to yourself thousands of times that you can turn the unfamiliar into the familiar. That's what human beings do best. We are adaptation machines. The capacity to take chaos and carve order out of it is built into our biology. But it requires courage to step into that chaos without running away. The first step is always the hardest because it is the first confrontation with the unknown. Once you take it, something shifts. Your nervous system slowly learns that the new terrain is survivable. The fear lessens. The actions begin to flow more naturally. And then, before you even realize it, the thing you once called hard becomes just another part of your normal life. This is why so many people remain stuck. They convince themselves that their discomfort is proof of impossibility. They tell themselves, this is too hard, when in reality, it's not too hard. It's just too new. That distinction matters because it changes how you approach the problem. If something is genuinely impossible, then giving up makes sense. But if something is simply new, then persistence is the path forward. You don't quit a new language because you can't speak fluently on day one. You don't abandon exercise because the first session felt awkward. You don't stop learning to drive just because you stalled the car. Or at least you shouldn't. Because all of those are symptoms of newness, not impossibility. The tragedy is that people often mislabel their struggles. They see the discomfort and they decide it must mean they're not cut out for it. But what it really means is that they are in the early stages of growth. And the early stages always feel uncomfortable, always feel clumsy, always feel uncertain. If you can shift your perspective from hard to new, you free yourself from that self-imposed limitation. You allow yourself to be a beginner without shame. And that is one of the most powerful psychological shifts you can make. When you treat life this way, everything opens up. You stop being paralyzed by the fear of failure. You stop assuming that your first attempt should be perfect. You begin to see yourself as someone in the process of becoming rather than someone fixed in a permanent state of incapacity. And that shift is liberating because it means you don't have to judge yourself so harshly for being new at something. You only have to keep going long enough for new to become normal. Think about it this way. The gap between I can't do this and I can do this is often nothing more than repetition. So the task doesn't change, you change, your nervous system rewires itself, your hands become steadier, your voice grows more confident, your movements become more fluid. What once looked like an insurmountable wall is gradually revealed to be nothing more than a staircase, one you were capable of climbing all along, so long as you kept putting one foot in front of the other. This is why perspective matters so much. When you call something hard, you give it unnecessary weight. You add emotional resistance to an already demanding situation. But when you call something new, you treat it as a stage, not a sentence. You remind yourself that you've faced newness before and conquered it countless times. And if you've done it before, you can do it again. So the next time you find yourself staring at something that feels impossible, pause and ask yourself, is it truly hard or is it simply new? That small shift in language might be the difference between giving up and persevering. It might be the difference between living a life bound by your comfort zone and living one defined by growth. Because at the heart of it, life is a series of new things that eventually become familiar. That's the pattern, that's the rhythm. The question is not whether something is hard. The real question is whether you're willing to endure the discomfort of newness long enough for it to become second nature. And if you are willing, then you'll realize something profound. What once intimidated you was never hard at all. It was simply waiting for you to make it familiar. If you think carefully about what allows something unfamiliar to become familiar, the answer is surprisingly simple: repetition. Growth doesn't require perfection at the start. It doesn't require flawless execution or genius-level talent. What it requires is exposure again and again until the brain rewires itself, until the body learns to move in rhythm, until the unfamiliar becomes second nature. The problem is that people confuse stumbling with failure and hesitation with incapacity. They think that if they can't perform smoothly right away, it means they'll never be able to. But that's not how human beings are built. We are learning creatures, adaptive creatures, designed to improve not in one giant leap, but through gradual, repeated steps. Look at how every genuine skill is acquired. When someone learns to play the piano, their fingers feel stiff and uncoordinated. They hit the wrong keys, they misread the notes, and their timing is clumsy. Yet if they keep at it day after day, those awkward attempts give way to fluidity. The muscles begin to remember. The patterns of movement etch themselves into the nervous system. After months of repetition, what once seemed beyond reach becomes a kind of unconscious mastery. And notice the shift did not come because the person was perfect from the start. It came because they were willing to endure the imperfection long enough for the repetition to work its transformation. The same principle applies everywhere. Think about language. You don't become fluent overnight. You mispronounce words, you struggle with grammar, you lose confidence in conversation. But with every repetition, every attempt, the fear loosens its grip. Your brain starts to recognize patterns, your tongue adapts to unfamiliar sounds, your mind connects meaning to form. And then, almost imperceptibly, the language that once felt foreign becomes part of your identity. Again, it wasn't perfection that carried you there. It was persistence. This is where many people fail. They want growth without repetition. They want mastery without the embarrassment of being a beginner. They want fluency without fumbling. But you cannot bypass the awkwardness of the early stage. That awkwardness is the soil from which competence grows. Every expert you admire has endured it. Every athlete, every artist, every leader has walked through that valley of imperfection. What separates them from those who give up is not talent, but endurance. They stayed with the process long enough to outgrow the awkwardness. And there's something profound in that recognition. It means that excellence is not a gift bestowed on a chosen few. It is the byproduct of repetition endured by anyone willing to persist. That's liberating, but it's also sobering, because it places the responsibility back on you. You can't excuse yourself by saying, I wasn't born with it. The question isn't what you were born with, it's what you're willing to practice. Psychologically, repetition does something extraordinary. The brain is constantly rewiring itself in response to the tasks you set before it. Every time you repeat an action, you carve deeper grooves into your neural pathways. At first, those grooves are shallow, easily overridden by doubt and hesitation. But as you return to the task, again and again, those grooves deepen. They become highways. The action becomes smoother, the resistance weaker, until eventually it feels almost effortless. What once felt like climbing a mountain becomes walking down a familiar road. This is the essence of growth. Now perfection is the enemy here. If you wait to act until you can do it perfectly, you'll never begin. If you punish yourself for every mistake, you'll kill your motivation before repetition has the chance to work its magic. That's why reframing is so important. Instead of seeing mistakes as failures, see them as investments. Every wrong note played on the piano is still a rehearsal. Every broken sentence in a new language is still practice. Every stammered presentation is still progress. As long as you show up, you're teaching your brain to adapt. The tragedy is that people sabotage themselves by demanding results too quickly. They expect fluency in weeks, strength in days, mastery in moments. And when it doesn't appear, they decide they're not capable. But impatience is just another form of fear. It keeps you from giving repetition the time it needs. If you can accept that growth is measured in small increments, the process becomes much easier to endure. You stop expecting miracles and start trusting the power of consistent effort. It's also worth noticing how repetition interacts with identity. Each time you repeat an action, you're not only training your body, you're reshaping the story you tell about yourself. The more you practice writing, the more you see yourself as a writer. The more you practice fitness, the more you see yourself as an athlete. Repetition isn't just about skill acquisition, it's about identity formation. And once your identity begins to align with your practice, consistency becomes natural. You no longer have to force yourself to act. You act because that's who you are. So when you confront something new and intimidating, remember this: you don't need to be perfect. You only need to show up. Again and again, the repetitions will take care of the rest. They will transform the clumsy into the competent, the unfamiliar into the familiar, and the impossible into the inevitable. The danger of quitting too soon is that you never give repetition a chance to work. You abandon the process before it has time to reshape you. You walk away in the awkward stage, never realizing that just beyond it lies fluency, confidence, and mastery. And then you tell yourself a false story that you couldn't do it. But the truth is, you didn't stay with it long enough to find out. So let me leave you with this. Growth doesn't demand perfection. It demands patience. It doesn't reward the flawless beginner. It rewards the persistent learner. Repetition is the bridge between new and natural. Cross that bridge and you'll discover that what once felt hard was never beyond you. It was simply waiting for you to practice it into familiarity.